So, we're going to dive into an argument that's so bold, it claims to prove that God exists using nothing but pure reason. No faith, no sacred texts, no scientific evidence, just logic. The big question is, can that really be done? Let's start with a really mind-bending puzzle. Is it possible for an idea to be so perfect, so complete, that it actually has to be real? This is a question philosophers have been wrestling with for centuries. And the answer? Well, it might just surprise you. Yeah, this is not some new age riddle. We're actually going to jump back in time almost 1,000 years to tackle an argument that has captivated and, let's be honest, frustrated thinkers ever since it was first written down. And our guide on this journey is Anselm of Canterbury. He was a philosopher and a monk who was on a very specific and pretty ambitious intellectual quest. So who was this guy? Well, Anselm lived a life that was really dedicated to both faith and reason. And back in 1078, while he was a Benedictine monk, he wrote this little book called the Prosologium. And tucked inside is the very argument we're about to unpack. You see, Anselm wasn't really satisfied with his other proofs for God's existence. A lot of them relied on looking at the world and drawing conclusions. He wanted something pure, a single, self-contained argument that didn't need anything from the outside world to work. And you can really hear the urgency in his own words. He was searching for, quote, a single argument that, valid in and of itself, would allow me to demonstrate that God truly exists. Apparently, the idea came to him in a flash of insight, and once he had it, he embraced it enthusiastically. Okay, so what was this big aha moment? What was the breakthrough idea? Well, believe it or not, the entire thing hinges on a very, very specific definition. All right, here it is. This is the whole key. Anselm defines God as a being than which nothing greater can be conceived. Now, pay close attention to that wording. He's not just saying the greatest thing that exists. He's saying the greatest thing you can possibly imagine. This definition isn't just a fancy phrase. It is the engine that drives this entire proof. So now for the really clever part. Anselm basically sets up this, it's like a logical trap for anyone who doubts. To spring this trap, he brings in a character straight from the Bible. In Latin, he's the insensato, which we translate as the fool. This fool represents the skeptic, the person who says, I don't believe, and he's the one Anselm's argument is designed to corner. Anselm starts with something that seems totally obvious, right? He says, look, when the fool hears the definition, a being than which nothing greater can be conceived, he gets it. He understands what the words mean. And because he understands it, that concept, that idea, now exists, at least in his mind. Okay, now here is the absolute key question. Which one of these is greater? A being that only exists as an idea in your head, or a being that exists both as an idea in your head and for real, out in the world? I mean, it seems like a no-brainer, doesn't it? The one that's real is obviously greater. And this is where the trap springs shut. The fool says, okay, sure, this greatest conceivable being is just an idea in my mind. But wait a minute, we just all agreed that a being that exists in reality is greater than one that's just an idea. So that means you could actually conceive of something greater than the greatest conceivable being, namely one that actually exists. Do you see the problem? It's a flat-out contradiction. The only possible way to escape this logical mess is to admit that the greatest conceivable being must exist in reality. And checkmate. According to Anselm, the argument is totally airtight. The moment you understand his definition of God, you are logically forced to admit that God exists. To deny it is to literally contradict yourself. The very act of thinking about the concept proves it must be real. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, okay, that's a neat little word game. But believe me, the impact of this argument has been absolutely massive. This thing has been debated, attacked, and defended for a solid 1,000 years. For over a millennium, some of the smartest philosophers in Western history have been wrestling with Anselm's logic. That makes it one of the most durable and controversial ideas ever. For centuries, everybody just called it Anselm's argument. Simple enough. It wasn't until way, way later that the famous philosopher Immanuel Kant gave it its modern, fancy name, the ontological argument. And ontological is just a philosophical term that means it's about the nature of being or existence itself. So what's the big takeaway from all this? What does this ancient argument really tell us about the relationship between reason, reality, and what we choose to believe? Well, it's interesting. For Anselm himself, this was never about proving God to himself. He was already a deep believer. His whole approach was something he called fides quaerens intellectum, which is just a fancy Latin way of saying faith seeking understanding. He started from a position of faith and then used logic as a powerful tool to explore and comprehend the truths he already held. The real power of this argument and why it's so fascinating is just how clean it is. It doesn't rely on any observations about the world, just pure reason. It all hinges on one of the most fundamental rules of logic, the law of non-contradiction. For Anselm, if something was logically necessary, it simply had to be true in reality. Logical truth guaranteed real truth. So, Anselm tried to build this perfect, inescapable bridge from an idea in the mind to a reality outside of it. Now, whether he actually pulled it off, well, that is a debate that is still raging 1,000 years later. But it leaves all of us with a pretty deep question to chew on, doesn't it? What's more powerful, an idea that we can prove with logic, or one that we can't?